brand differentiation versus alienation of audiences. The ability to differentiate yourself comes from an ability to really look at your peers, look at brands, competitors, understand why they've taken the approach they have, and to simply do things differently. The key to really differentiating yourself is differentiation often boils down to an original thought or idea that's nice and hopeful in nature. Differentiation is about being brave enough and optimistic enough to put something out there that's different and believe that it will be received with kindness. I love working with Pilot House because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilot House, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilot House, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you. Hi, welcome back to Ad-venturous, the podcast produced by DTC and hosted by me, Aves. Today, I wanted to kick the episode off by telling you guys about my go-to coffee order, which is a pumpkin spice latte, but make it freezing cold. Just kidding. Those white girl pumpkin spice lattes annoy me. If you don't get that reference, good for you. I actually really envy you, and I'm happy for you. Your Ryan Murphy TV show exposure is low, but if you do get that reference, I feel like you kind of might have an inclination about what this episode is going to be. Today, I want to talk to you guys about something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is brand differentiation versus alienation of audiences. So that stupid line that's like a pumpkin spice latte, but make it freezing cold, is like a really primal example in today's cultural landscape of alienation instead of differentiation. So instead of being like mysterious and having lore and mythology, the girl in That Is Scream Queens, again, if you don't know that information, I'm so envious of you because my brain is so rotted. Growing up a Gleek, I have seen too much Ryan Murphy. Anyway, it's like a really good example of just like how that line was sort of like meant to be perceived, which is like, I'm so different and cool, and how people actually perceived it, which is quite alienating, and we don't like that girl. She gives off a really odd vibe. I think like 10, 15 years ago, we started to see these really overly earnest millennial brands popping up, and they treated us, their consumers, like friends. They partnered like their sage green branding with really relatable language and this really specific type of faux transparency. And back then, everyone really loved it and gravitated towards these brands because it was quite a break in what we'd previously seen. I think the rise of paid social and organic efforts by big brands, it sort of demanded an accessibility that didn't exist before that. So if you think about huge brands like a Dove, previously, it was just Dove, and we existed outside of it, and they existed to sell us things, and that was kind of the relationship. But now, because of socials, a lot of brands have gotten on this bandwagon of showing up in a different way. We're not like other brands, we're cool, we make funny jokes in your TikTok comment section. That's kind of the vibe. And that strategy does feel a little bit outdated for today's market, which is why I want to talk about brand differentiation today. Being just relatable is no longer a differentiator in the marketplace. It's kind of bland and boring now, and it feels almost inauthentic when we see brands show up in very social spaces in a way that feels almost inappropriate sometimes. So yeah, today I wanted to talk about how to actually differentiate yourself as a brand and what the difference is between differentiation and alienation. So I feel like if you've listened to a couple episodes, you know by now that I am really bad at prepping examples for the concept that I want to talk about. And I come in concept heavy and then I make up examples on the spot. And they're almost always the same because no matter where I'm working, I usually have a candle in front of me and a couple of sunny angels. It's very repetitive. So instead of talking about diptyque or sunny angels, I thought we would talk about an actual relevant prepped example to kind of lead us through this conversation about differentiation versus alienation. So I want to talk about a sort of current campaign that I saw from Refy, which is a cult makeup brand which was founded in 2020. It's a bit of a spoiler. I'll talk more about Refy a little bit later. But they have launched sort of a mini campaign that's a bit of a nod to the iconic Dove line, Beauty Never Gets Old. They've been partnering content with women with gray hair in their 60s plus with taglines like iconic never gets old, which is really fun and cute. And I love it. They paired a lot of this imagery and a lot of the materials that they would have prepped for this campaign with social captions like a campaign dedicated to the women we aspire to be. So they're doing it in a very specific way. They're not opening up the floodgates and saying we are a brand for women 60 plus. They're saying we, Refy, are made up of women who will one day hopefully be 60 plus. And so we are inspired and in awe of them. It's a really fun, cute, sweet campaign. And I think it would be really worthwhile to also chat about who Refy is as a brand and who their target consumer is and why this move, in my opinion, helps differentiate them in the space and also helps build community. And ultimately, they're starting the hard work. They're a very fresh brand. They've been around for about 5 years, like I said, but they're starting the hard work of putting a moat around what they're building and making it future proof, which I think is really exciting and fun to see. But before I get into talking about Refy, who they are right now, why this move makes a lot of sense, I thought I would use this little podcast platform that I have to say something that's like really important to me and also I think really important in the context of talking about Refy and this move, which is that I cannot wait to get older. I think about it all the time. I used to be of the opinion that time was a thief. I think especially as a woman, we are taught to see time as taking things from you. And so I never really stopped to consider why I felt that way or what I could stand to gain by moving past that line of thinking that time was always taking away what was most precious to me. But I think it actually took losing a pretty close friend this past year to really understand fully that time is the ultimate gift that we have. I think women, like I said in particular, are really trained to fear time ticking along. And it can get really noisy trying to decide when to start getting preventative Botox and like what type of retinol you need to use at night versus the day and researching types of like facials and castor oils and face tape, all of this stuff that just, yeah, it becomes noise and it stops you from really enjoying the time that you have, in my opinion. And I think if you listen to this podcast, you're probably somewhat interested in marketing. So I don't really have to tell you that a lot of that rhetoric exists to help market those products. And it's just kind of about selling you things. And I do like to spend money on tools and creams and different forms of body care and skincare. But I also think there's like some balance to that. And like I said, time is just going to happen and I'm going to start looking older eventually. So when you stop allowing the fear of getting older to occupy so much real estate in your brain, you can really start to do fun side quests like starting a podcast or paint by numbers. That's a hobby I've recently gotten into. Very fun, very good. I think this like huge shift, like I mentioned, it does come from when you lose someone and you start to really understand time being a gift and being able to be around and see people you love and do things you love. Like that is so precious. There's no other way to put it. And I think that last year, as I started entering like my mid and late 20s, I started getting that panic about getting older, which is so nuts because I am in my now late 20s. And it's like, I should not have been worrying in my mid 20s about getting older. You know what I should have been worrying about? Getting enough iron, building bone density. I should have been investing in my retirement fund more than I was. And also, I should have been worried about eating enough protein at the start of the day. Like those were things I didn't think about that I really should have, because they matter a lot more than whether or not you're going to get older. It's just silly boots, and we shouldn't really spend time thinking about what we might look like in future decades. Ageism, I think, is so widely accepted in our culture because it keeps us, especially as women, really separate from one another, and it keeps us from learning lessons from older women. And I have been very lucky and benefited from an age gap relationship that I usually use the example of Marty McFly and Doc in Back to the Future to explain. One of my very best friends is exactly 40 years older than me, and we have been friends for years. And I have to say, her perspective always feels fresh, which is crazy because she's been on planet Earth 40 years longer than I have. But she just has like different priorities and a different way of thinking about things because the culture she grew up in is much different than the culture that I have grown up in. And so it just makes for a more interesting dynamic and interesting life. So yeah, I think aging is beautiful. I wanted to get that out there. I'm really excited to see like who I am at 30 and 40. I have a sneaking suspicion that I will really hit my stride at 50. I think I have known that since I was about 7. But I just think if you go about life thinking that every stage is going to be fun and have room for curiosity and growth, then that's exactly what's going to happen. So just embrace it. That's my little rant before we get into the Refy breakdown and this full episode. If you are someone who's worried about aging, let it go. It's really fun. Go find some hobbies and do something cool and cute and spend your time in ways that you want to instead of being anxious about the future. Back to Refy. Refy, founded in 2020, very young, like I mentioned, as a brand. And they are a creator founded brand, which I've been particularly fascinated by lately. And they sort of introduced their line as being completely vegan, very minimal design, super, I have to say, not differentiated in the space at that particular point in time. It was just sort of the status quo. A lot of brands were popping up to service Gen Z and what we wanted and presenting very similar things. Their first sort of category that they explored and campaign was centered around eyebrows. It's not like the sexiest category in beauty, but at that point, brows were a really big deal. I was there, boots on the ground. Everyone in that 2015 era really into big drawn on eyebrows using like Anastasia Beverly Hills products. Love, shout out. But as we sort of transitioned from 2015 to 2020, people just started doing their brows differently. So gels and pens like Refy were launching. Those made a lot of sense at that particular moment in time. And like I said before, they were very status quo as a brand at that point. And they were hyper relevant, which I think is great at the point of launch for any brand, but especially in a very, very competitive vertical like beauty. Being hyper relevant and capturing exactly what people want at that point in time is almost like the only way that you get any traction in those spaces at this point in time. In 2022, Refy expanded their product line to lips as well as some skin-focused SKUs, and they also launched their products in Sephora, which is always a really big deal, I think, in that space to launch in Sephora, or the Australian Mecca. I'm about to move back to Australia for 6 months, so shout out Mecca. Love Mecca. I think it's better than Sephora. I'm getting distracted. I can feel it in my heart. I'm not going to talk about it, but it's very interesting from a business point of view. Anyway, back to Refy. They've gone on to grow really steadily, in my opinion. They've expanded on their hero categories, and they've established themselves as an authoritative and kind of like cool it girl brand in the space. But I have said this so many times on this podcast, the beauty industry is really crazy these days. It truly is. It's like kind of stupid, and things change so rapidly that it's a really difficult place, like I said, to get any kind of traction unless you have like hyper relevancy and are making products exactly for the way that people want to do makeup in that year, which is, again, nuts. I feel like that's never really existed within that category before now. And the way that brands like jump on categories rather than branding and personas is really telling and interesting as well, that we're in a crazy time for the beauty industry. In 3 years, everyone might want no eyebrows at all. And then Refy, with all their brow sculpting tools, are going to be down and out quite a bit of rev if we all decide to shave off our brows and go the dry clean route, you know? So it's like, to create something really long lasting in a space like beauty, you really need to think outside of the box. One brand that didn't really do this and that fascinates me, maybe I'll do an episode on it, is Glossier. I think about the rise and plateau and subsequent fall of Glossier all the time as someone who was like really deeply impacted by their branding as a teenage girl. You really, like, Glossier is a great example of, you can't predict what trends are going to pop up along the way. And you also can't overly invest on an initial brand with an initial persona, because that group is going to age out of what you're selling, which is so interesting. So what you can do is build investment and trust in the actual brand. And that, I believe, is what Refy is up to right now. So Refy is definitely a Gen Z makeup brand. Like I've mentioned, from their visuals to their product line, it's pretty obvious who they're targeting and who their core base is. And what is particularly interesting right now, I think, about marketing to Gen Z is that we're all starting to be like actual people with incomes and tastes and preferences and purchasing power in the marketplace. So if Refy is hitting the mark now, if they're successful with this slightly younger demo, why start showing off products on older models? Why are they bringing in women who are 60 plus, centering them in campaigns? What could that possibly mean? I think that some folks might look at that and assume that they're trying to expand their target persona and that they're kind of looking to be maybe the next Dove and service women of all ages, which it's not like nobody else except for Gen Z women can shop Refy. It's just like, that is, I think, pretty obviously their target persona. But yeah, trying to figure out what their motivations are, I think, gets a little bit sticky with this one, unless we really do think about this framing and brand differentiation conversation. So from my point of view, I would guess that they're seeing young women with opinions that really mirror mine, that I went on my little soapbox rant about, which is that we have really been fed a lot of anti-aging media in the past forever, but it's gotten particularly intense in the past few years. And I think that there is a bit of a shift in public sentiment happening where it's just not too much now. It's a little bit much. It feels a little bit much. So I think that they're really capturing that in their audience because, like I mentioned, it's a very Gen Z focused brand, but it's also like a very minimal approach to makeup. So already your base is not someone who's like putting on a ton of makeup or super concentrated on their looks in most cases. So again, it's almost a safe bet that Refy has made in assuming that a lot of their core audience is having this internal dialogue, much like I did, where it's like, do I actually care if I get a wrinkle? Probably not. That might be actually a little bit cute and iconic. So it's a way for them to signal to their base that as they get older, they are still going to be the premier brand of choice, and that they'll kind of be there right alongside what their base is doing, and that they're evolving and thinking past, just being young and in your 20s and wanting really big bushy brows. They're already signaling that they can evolve as a brand and as a tastemaker, which I think is really smart and really interesting. There's already been, I think, a lot of conversations and people calling out the deeply entrenched ageism in Gen Z and Gen Alpha specifically, which I do think, again, is just very interesting, but I also think it's very cyclical. It's like all people when they're young don't know how good it is to get old because you haven't gotten old yet. And now that I am not that old, but a little bit older than I was at 19, I get that, but you don't really get that until you get it. So I don't think it's like a Gen Z or Gen Alpha issue. I just think that it is important for brands to start thinking about how they're going to approach that, because if not, you might have the Glossier fall off where it's like, why am I a grown woman purchasing a product called like bomb.com? Probably not. So it's almost future proofing in a way. And again, just signaling that you are going to evolve as a brand and sort of keep up with what your consumers actually want. So let's talk about differentiation versus alienation, because this is where I get really excited and you get, just hyped up. So my little opening line about pumpkin spice lattes and that scene from Scream Queens, which is so famous and so embarrassing and radiates pick me energy, as the kids say. I think we should really first kind of break down what pick me energy is, because I think it plays into this idea of differentiation versus alienation kind of perfectly. Basically, if you hear someone say that something has pick me energy, they're saying that the motivations behind someone's actions are purely based on appealing to external forces. This is often applied to like girls who are like, I don't wear any makeup and I love sports. People often label that as like pick me energy. It's a very negative framing, and we tend to think of these people as folks who don't actually have any kind of moral or like stylistic compass. It's inauthentic, which is the worst thing you can be on the internet, apparently, where people post things to get attention, which I think is really funny. Also a different podcast episode. But yeah, we're starting to call brands out for this kind of behavior as well, which I think is really interesting from like a cultural critique and media landscape point of view. That, you know, in previous years, like in the past 5-7 years, everyone thought it was so funny when Wendy's would like hop on Twitter and clap back at someone who said they didn't like a burger. And now I think the macroeconomics have shifted so much that people are like, what value are you bringing? I don't want to see your silly little puns in my comment section. I want to know what you're selling, what the value prop is. And it's a much more, I've referenced this before, sort of like Gen X approach to thinking through purchasing, which is really focused on, does this thing function? Does it work? And also, if you wanted to go back and listen to the Gen X pod episode, I had a really fun time recording it. And I feel like Gen X is, in my opinion, the coolest generation that ever existed. Anyway, I think it's really interesting whenever we get into this state of assuming we know and understand the motivations behind the actions of someone, like a pick me girl, or now we're all really latching on to these like quote unquote performative boys who love Claro and matcha. And there's always a bit of merit to it, but I think the internet has a tendency to take things a bit too far, which is what's happened with the pick me girls, performative boys, and also cringy brands is maybe how we would talk about them. So I think that it's, yeah, assuming what a brand is doing is a lot easier than like assuming what a person is doing, if that makes sense. So how can you as a brand owner or brand operator successfully differentiate yourself in the market without alienating and ostracizing people and having people, you know, catch on to that really inauthentic, earnest brand approach? I think the ability to actually differentiate yourself comes from an ability to really look at your peers, look at brands, competitors, understand why they've taken the approach they have, and to simply do things differently. I think it takes a lot of thought and a lot of research, which are two of my favorite hobbies, to successfully do this. I think that you need to spend a significant chunk of time with your competitors, and you need to really understand their branding intimately if you're going to truly differentiate yourself in the category next to them. The key to really differentiating yourself is being able to look at the choices that your competitors have made and do something different. I think that a lot of the time, in my experience, when brands set up shop and start to decide who they are, they make these choices based on what already exists and following suit and fitting in, rather than really making truly distinct choices. And I'm not talking about when people show up and it's like, we're a messy, scrappy brand and we're filming our ads with our iPhones and stuff like that. It's like, that doesn't actually truly count as being a fresh perspective on a category or vertical. So becoming a brand that like truly differentiates itself from its competitors is truly about one thing, in my opinion, and that one thing is intentionality. And intentionality behind the choices that you make as you sort of build up the foundation and continue to put bricks on who you are as a brand. Like, think about the beauty industry as a whole. It's so oversaturated. I've already said it 1,000 times in this single podcast. I've said it in other episodes. There are brands for every type of consumer selling mostly the exact same product, which is really interesting. And it's a real minefield to figure out. It's like every person wants a lip treatment right now, but different groups of people want different types of lip treatments, and we will service them differently. And the price point is all over the map, but all of these products genuinely do the same thing. Not happening anywhere else but beauty, but so interesting. And I think presents a ton of challenges for anyone who wants to really break into the beauty world and actually differentiate themselves from what other people are doing. Like I mentioned earlier, for a period of time, everyone was obsessed with those like really structured and drawn on brows, and the products that help you achieve that look were selling like freaking hotcakes. Remember the matte Kylie lip kits? I had a couple of those. Wild times in 2015. And 10 years later, I would never buy a matte Kylie lip kit. That was really wild of me. I don't know why I had so many. I didn't really do full glam makeup that much. Why was I wearing that intense of a lip? It's tough to look back on pictures. So I think, quick rerouting there, I think a lot of beauty brands that set up post 2018 really think about that a lot, because we all witnessed how quickly our tastes change, and it's only gotten more and more rapid as people have started to adopt like platforms like TikTok, where our attention spans are just not what they used to be. And that comes into play when we think of the trajectory of beauty trends in different categories. So, how do you maintain agility and how do you become a true cult brand? Again, that is just from intentionality. As one of my favorite drag queens says, choices. It's all about choices. If you get that reference and you know I'm talking about Tatiana, let me know. I love Tati. Sipping tea with Tati? Okay. Anyway, not moving with the tide in a time and place where it feels like you have to be really trendy and everyone has the same Stanley Cup and everyone is buying the Summer Fridays lip treatment is very impressive. And I think even more impressive when you can do it in a cultural way, the way that Refy has done it in this iconic Never Gets Old campaign. Like I mentioned, the current tide is sort of overwhelmingly ageist. Most brands will sell you multiple products which target fine lines, promise like glowy glass skin like a baby. And so Refy is really differentiating themselves visually and also culturally, but not in a way that's alienating the rest of their base, which I'll talk about in a second. I think another good brand to call out that does this very well in this space is Jones Road, Bobbi Brown. It's just kind of like a very minimal and realistic approach to the category. Both of them share that, where it's sort of like enhancing what you've already got, not kind of bulldozing, paving over, and building something new. And also, they show a huge diversity in the type of people who might use their products. Jones Road is a little bit different in that they service like a slightly older demographic. So again, I think it's really interesting and I think it's really smart that Refy is doing this now when they do tend to service younger people, showing older people as a way to, just really differentiate yourself. Another thing to call out about why I think this is really successful from Refy is that this campaign feels true to what the brand has been presenting the entire time. It's not like super disruptive to their everyday marketing efforts. They've made a distinct choice, and that is the differentiation. They haven't completely done a 180. It fits in with the story of brand that they've been telling this whole time, while also presenting something a little bit new. So, let's talk about how they might have gone a different route and really alienated their base instead of differentiating themselves as a brand. In my experience as a political strategist, which is both vast and horrifying, I found that differentiation often boils down to an original thought or idea that's nice and hopeful in nature. Differentiation is about being brave enough and optimistic enough to put something out there that's different and believe that it will be received with kindness. Alienation, which is sometimes intentional, by the way, usually comes from a thought that is much more pessimistic in nature, and you're doing it really, again, intentionally. So it's two sides of the exact same coin, but the goal is just different. So with alienation, usually you're trying to sever someone's ties with culture, with society, with your brand itself. There's a real difference there in the original sort of seed of thought when it's alienation versus differentiation. So say Refy had instead run a campaign that was like trashing women who'd made the choice to get fillers or get Botox, and they took a really negative approach and basically said, hey, if you've ever gotten a little bit of Botox in your face, don't buy Refy. We hate you. That's going to alienate a large chunk of their base who have maybe already made the choice to do that. Do whatever you want. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. Should be the ideal. But yeah, it's like really interesting to think about if they'd taken a really hard line and a really cold approach that's rooted in shame and judgment, the overall campaign would have been so much different rather than the idea of celebrating really iconic women as they get older and possess more wisdom and pizzazz. That is so different than saying you are a bad person for getting filler Botox, for not wanting to age. That is, again, is completely different. And while you might quickly say the sentimentality behind the two messages are very similar, when you really deconstruct them, that's where you can really start thinking about differentiation. Again, just being a really nice, hopeful, excited play to say, look at how cool these women are. We love them. We hope you love them too. And we hope to be as cool as them one day, versus you shouldn't have done that. Blech, gross. Don't be afraid of aging. You're being stupid. That is going to, like I said, alienate people more than it's going to differentiate. So it takes a lot of strategy, I think, to really understand which route you should take. And it does, like I said earlier, it takes a lot of thought and research, and it takes a real intimacy with the brands around you to understand how to successfully differentiate yourself in the market. I do honestly think that there is a lot of room right now for brands to take these big swings and really differentiate themselves in categories like beauty. I think another one that's really interesting is wellness. It's gotten really one note across the board for a lot of brands. So there's a lot of different places where I see, as someone who's helped sort of operate brands and figure out what the next right move is, there's a lot of opportunity in different spaces right now to make a big swing and differentiate yourself, much like Refy has, and not in a way that's like, oh, immediately this is going to blow up and speak to new people. But an important note, and why I want to talk about Refy in particular, is this move to sort of differentiate themselves in the space isn't necessarily to attract net new customers, like I said, but it's to solidify their cult brand status and make sure that they don't hit a Glossier like plateau and then descent where their customers just outgrow them and what they're serving up through media and through ads. I think that it's really smart to think about differentiation in that way, where, you know, you're not getting stuck in your old ways. You're moving, you're progressing, you're changing. That is really the key to both running a successful brand, in my opinion, and also life, to be open to like change and differentiating yourself in different ways at different points in time. Really important. Like I mentioned, it is important to really understand strategically what you're doing instead of just going off and firing on all cylinders. This is something that we think about and do a lot at Pilot House, which is really understanding who our target persona is, really making sure that the segmentation is down packed before we start making moves like this, so that we understand the impact it has on those core personas and we don't ultimately like jeopardize the business. That's never cute. It's never something we want to do. So really be cautious if you're curious about like really differentiating yourself. You're maybe looking around and you sell water bottles, which is a very saturated space right now, and you want to start really showing up differently in the marketplace for people. Reach out, go to the Pilot House website, fill out a lead form. If you say that you came from the Ad-venturous pod, we can chat directly and I can kind of look at your brand. I love doing this. A good warning, I guess, is I am a real yapper. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably know that already. So be prepared for a long call. That's what I've been learning since I've been talking to more of you guys. I can't stop chatting when we get on the phone, but it's been really fun and I really like truly wonderful, gratifying experience. So yeah, if you want to chat about brand differentiation for you, or if you want to chat about like getting your personas set up so you can make these moves in the future, also happy to chat. Q4 is coming up. I know it's a scary time to be making big moves like this, but it's also my favorite time to do it. One of our high scale brands and I, we've been talking a lot about the ways that we've differentiated in the past and how new audiences that we've really conquered in this past year, how we can start doing that work with them. Really exciting. I love it. I do it every day. Well, Monday to Friday. Take the weekends off, but I basically live and breathe this stuff. So yeah, like I said, go over to Pilot House website, fill out a lead form, let them know that you came from this podcast. If you want to talk to me, if you don't want to talk to such a yappy fan of marketing and strategy, then say you don't want to talk to me, I guess. That was the episode for today. I hope it was helpful. I hope you start just sort of thinking about how you can differentiate yourself out there, because it is, I say this a lot, getting tougher and tougher to make paid social work, which is exciting for me. I always describe myself as an opportunity optimist. I love when new challenges come up or new tools, but it is getting much more difficult to actually get traction and build paid social campaigns and a paid social program that really truly works for your brand. So if that is, again, something that's making you a little bit nervous, feel free to reach out. I would love to chat. There's just, so much possibility out there right now. And I think a lot of times people get a little bit nervous and scared. But for me, like I said, it just presents a lot of opportunities to learn new things and try new things. So hopefully, like I said, this episode was helpful. If you haven't given the podcast a subscribe or a rating, please do wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, that has been new to me and it's been a really fun experience. I've been on LinkedIn for I think it's 2 months now, maybe 3 after having never had it. And it is actually very truly fun. I like it. I'm in my posting era. So feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'm just Aves Valerio. And also, if you are a TikTok fan, I've just started posting on TikTok after 8 years of a social media sabbatical. So that is also interesting. And the username there is ad_venturous_Aves. So thank you so much for listening. I really, truly appreciate it. And hopefully this episode was helpful. If you have any ideas or topics you want to cover, feel free to leave a comment and let me know. I definitely will work it into the plans. And I will chat to you guys next week. Thank you.